what is the waterfall methodology in software development? What are its advantages? What are its disadvantages? And how does each stage break down? In this video, we're going to learn a lot more about something called the waterfall methodology. Firstly, let's look at the software development process in general. So there's up to 7 stages in a software development process. If you look online, these individual stages have slightly different names from time to time, but they tend to break down to analysis, design, implementation, testing, documentation, evaluation, and then finally maintenance. And this iterative cycle of stages allows us to develop robust and trustworthy software. Now, it's called the waterfall method because the work done in each of the stages tends to flow down into the next. So the analysis stage, the outcomes from that stage is passed down into the design stage is passed down into the implementation stage, and so on. Now, iteration is a very important keyword to remember. Iteration essentially just means when something is repeated. Okay, so an iterative process is when one or more phases in the waterfall model are repeated, usually on discovery of new information, especially bugs. And not every mistake will be noticed. So let's look at an example of dating app and see how each stage breaks down. So in the analysis phase, the product team would look at some market research to analyze some user needs for a dating app and write a business requirements document which details any proposed features of the app. So this could include things like user profiles, a matching algorithm, some chat functions, payment processing, push notifications, and all those kind of things. And that's all done at the analysis phase. And the information from that is passed into the design phase, where the engineering team just creates a system architecture diagram showing how the client or the devices that the users will use to access the system, the server and the database components, and how they interact. We're also going to look at user interface wireframes and designs for the front end app that the user is going to see. And then at this phase, we start to write technical specifications, so pseudocode or flowcharts or things like that. And the information from the design phase is passed on to the implementation phase when we actually go and build it. So in the case of Match's dating app, the engineers are going to build the front end iOS or Android app and the back-end server based on the specifications that came in from the design stage. A database will be built to store the user data, matching the database design. And at this stage, all the programmers will follow some coding best practices. Now, that could be company best practices or it could be international best practices. Once the program is fully implemented, it's passed on to the testing phase, and this is where extensive testing is performed. Every aspect of the program is tested, so its core code components, any integrations with other systems, the performance of the code, the security of the code, and the usability of the user interface are all tested, and any bugs at this stage are identified and fixed. Once testing's finished, we pass on the results of testing to the documentation phase, where documentation is obviously created. So we create things like inline help or user guides, installation guides, technical requirements, and in some cases API documentation so that other programmers can access the services that we have created. Once the documentation stage is finished, and by the way, this is usually the one that falls by the wayside because time might have stretched or been stretched in the implementation and testing phases. We'll move on to the evaluation, and it's at this point that the client comes back into the project. So stakeholders, so that's executives from the project, the clients, any investors, they all look at the documentation and make sure that they're happy with it, and they test the app to ensure that it is high quality before it's been launched to their users or their members of staff. At the evaluation phase, there's lots of things that could happen. Might be user acceptance testing, so that's a form of beta testing where the software is installed in an office so that the users can start to use it in their daily sort of work processes and pass back any feedback that might have been missed in testing. But there's also a stakeholder demo where the people who are developing the product show the working app to some key stakeholders and walk them through some major features and sort of work processes or user flows. And at this point, we get some feedback, and that's passed back to the development team for any improvements. The final phase is the maintenance phase. And at the maintenance phase, it's when the app is deployed or launched, and we would use some analytics to make sure that the users are downloading it, rating it, reporting any bugs, and the bug fixes would take place continuously based on the importance of user feedback. Now, there's advantages of waterfall methodology over all the other software development methodologies. The major advantage is that it's got a fixed timeline and budget. Okay, so you know exactly where you are when you start, that the product will be delivered to the client maybe in 9 months or 18 months. Because all the project goals are specific to the stage and they're set out from the start. Another sort of advantage is that the client isn't involved. So when you've set up your waterfall methodology, you don't need frequent feedback from the client. And this will save time because the developers can just get on with building it to meet the original requirements as specified by the user, so they don't get any opportunity to change their mind. However, it is a bit of a disadvantage to not be able to talk to the client, as you'll find out. The downside of waterfall methodology is that if there's any unexpected problems or last minute changes, addressing these can be difficult and timely depending on the stage that you're working at. If you notice, for example, that during the implementation phase, the app that you're building or the product that you're building has a poor design, you might figure it out at implementation phase, but similarly, you might not find out until testing or maybe even evaluation phase. And in these situations, there's a drawback to having that rigid, different phases and the fact that you can't move on until the previous one is complete. Best idea is to get some good system analysts involved so that they gather as much information as possible at the very start of the project so that you reduce the risk of needing to go back and iterate on a phase. Hopefully that's given you a good introduction to the waterfall methodology, but if you have any questions, please add them in the box just coming up now.